Native American Indians, prehistoric Native Americans they didn't live in the cave. There's evidence they were in the cave, and this talks to your question. We know that they did not live in the cave because it's too dark, it's too damp, you can't grow food, and there's really not a water source. But we think that they did use it for ceremonial purposes, particularly rite of passage type ceremonies for young men or young boys turning to men. And how do we know that? Well, there is something called paleofeces that are found in the cave. They've been examined. Things don't really deteriorate in the cave. There's also been remains found in the cave that were pretty intact. But the paleofeces, when they've been analyzed, the DNA shows that it was all males that were in the cave. No evidence of women being in the cave. Hence the original man cave. So when they entered the cave, they would collect bundles of reeds very similar to this. The reeds grow on the banks of the Green River, which is not far from here. So they would light these bundles and come into the cave, and they would last about 45 minutes to an hour. Whereas when that was burned out, they would toss it, and then they would pick up another bundle and light that as well. So if they knew they were going to spend considerable time in the cave, they would have to bring several bundles with them. There have been remains of prehistoric Native Americans found in the cave, and they've been pretty intact, almost mummified. But then they left the cave they were in here 5,000 years ago. So like 2,000 years after that, there's no evidence of them being here. We don't know why they left. We do know that they mined gypsum. Not quite sure why they mined gypsum, except to perhaps use it as a diuretic during any ceremonies that they did in here. So fast forward to our buddy John Houchins in the late 1700s when he was hunting for bear, and the bear led him to the mouth of the cave. So then we talked briefly about Stephen Bishop and the Bransford brothers who did guided tours here. So they used a lantern very similar to this, called an oil lantern. And you might think it looks a little different than most oil lanterns you would see because there's no globe on it. The reason there's no globe is that they tended to use fuel that they could most readily get their hands on, particularly chicken fat or bacon fat. The preferred fat would be whale blubber, which did not smoke, but there's kind of like not whales in southwestern Kentucky. So, but the trouble with the type of fat they use is that it smoked a lot. So they just forwent the globe. So Stephen Bishop, one of the things that he was renowned for was discovering new parts of the cave. There's a part that can be seen on the historic tour called the Bottomless Pit, 300-foot deep pit that there was a visitor who challenged him saying, "I'll give you a fistful of money if you can find an unexplored part of the cave for me." So he said, okay. So he found this large pit, which he could only see with the light of a lantern like this. He eventually dragged in, we think it's either a ladder or even like a tulip poplar log, and put it across the bottomless pit and shimmied across it with this in between his teeth. I just can't imagine doing that. But he made a fistful of money doing that. So of course, nowadays, when it comes to light, we have our groovy dork lights, which someone left this on, or we have electricity in here. And just a little aside from that, you may notice occasionally green stuff growing on the walls. That's algae from the introduction of artificial light in the cave. So the Park Service is switching over to LEDs, hopefully to help alleviate that situation. Okay, so let's fast forward now to when Mammoth Cave, during the time when the slaves were guiding tours here, one of the owner of the cave at that time was a Dr. Crone, Kroghan, but pronounced Crone. He was the owner of the cave and owner of the slaves. And he was interested in treating the disease called consumption But what do we know consumption as? Tuberculosis. It's very prevalent at the time in the mid 1800s. So he had another doctor friend convince him that cave air would be beneficial for people with consumption, and perhaps he should start a treatment facility inside the cave. Well, we now know that the kind of air in the cave is probably the worst thing you could do for people with lung ailments. But at that time, they didn't realize that. So they actually, in this area, built consumptive huts. And people would clamor to be part of this experiment. And people with consumption would live in these huts continuously for several months, thinking that they were being treated successfully for consumption. Unfortunately, a lot of those folks made it out of the cave in a pie box. So that was an unsuccessful experiment. So that's something that this area is known for. So the park, or the Mammoth Cave became a park in 1941. We're celebrating our 75th anniversary of being a national park and continuously giving tours here. Let's see, the other areas of this park that I wanted to point out to you is there's an area over here called Lookout Mountain. It really looks like a cliff type area, but it actually is a dead end to the cave. That's why we have it cordoned off. It does not go anywhere, as well as this area over here. There was an area up here to the left where they used to try to grow mushrooms because it's very close to the surface there. But then other than that, that part of the cave just ends as well. So there's no place else to go. Any questions at this point?
Can we go over to that crossing and look out on it?
Would you like to look over Lookout Mountain?
Can we?
Sure.
Maybe?
Just don't go past the cordoned off part. Okay. Which is right there. And there was a lady that fell there the other day, so please watch your step.
Okay, well, we can go to it and look out.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to point out is the path that you're walking on was initially put in by the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC, in the 1930s. If you don't know what the CCC is, it was an effort put forth by President Franklin Roosevelt to put men to work during the Depression. There was a lack of work, people were starving, times were desperate, and he wanted to do something about it. So the Civilian Conservation Corps did all kinds of things for our national parks. They laid the framework for the trails in here, and also as you drive through the park and you notice how forested it is, when the Park Service procured this land, it was all farmland. So they planted all the trees that you see as you drive through the park. So they did a great service for us. Now you can see that the surface is breaking down, and there are plans to replace this. Any other questions? All right, if you want to take a look around for a minute or two, and then we can start making our way back. No. And actually, I misspoke. It's not the historic tour. It's the domes of the East. So you actually have to buy a ticket for that, and there's a bus ride to take. Yeah, I know. Were you just getting here?